Let's jump right into this explainer because today we're unpacking a really fascinating on-the-ground account of how domain modeling actually works in practice. We're going to walk through a classic war story from the trenches of domain-driven design, specifically looking at a concept called knowledge crunching. Let's dive in.
There's this great quote that sets the stage perfectly for us. Domain modeling does not start with perfect nouns, it starts with confusion, bad assumptions, and a lot of correction. I absolutely love that. It totally shatters the myth that software architecture is this neat, pristine academic exercise. To really see this in action, imagine being tasked with writing advanced printed circuit board or a PCB design software without knowing a single thing about electrical engineering. Talk about pressure, right?
Section 1. Starting with confusion. So sitting down with these PCB domain experts for the first time was, well, frankly, it was discouraging. These brilliant circuit designers didn't want a complex software model, they basically just wanted some simple file sorting scripts. But right in the middle of all that initial frustration, a little glimmer of hope appeared. They kept repeating this one specific word, nets. In their world, a net is essentially a wire conductor that connects components on a board. Grabbing onto that single repeated term gave us the very first piece of our domain model puzzle.
Now, what do you do when you get that first clue? You get up and walk to the whiteboard. I drew this incredibly basic, naive sketch of objects interacting, just a net connecting to a chip. Sure, it was rudimentary, but it suddenly gave everyone in the room something physical to look at, point to, and walk through scenarios with.
Section 2. Triggering expert corrections.
As you might guess, that rough whiteboard sketch didn't magically solve everything. Actually, it caused immediate friction. But here's the secret. That is exactly what you want. I was up there calling things chips or just drawing generic boxes, and the experts immediately pushed back. They were like, well, the components wouldn't necessarily have to be chips, and they started throwing out specific jargon like component instances or refdes. That collision of our two worlds, right there at the whiteboard, that was the actual birth of our ubiquitous language. We were forging a shared terminology to bridge the code and their reality. Pushing forward, I drew another sketch, trying to model signals moving from one chip to a net and then branching out to others. To a software engineer like me, this looked entirely logical, but putting it up on the board prompted the domain experts to jump right in and point out a massive, crucial detail I was missing. They stopped me and said, look, it isn't enough to say a signal arrives at a refdes, we have to know the pin. That was a huge aha moment for us. They clarified that a pin belongs to only one component instance and it connects to only one net. Suddenly, the model was snapping into focus, getting much sharper. And notice this didn't happen by reading a spec document. It happened because we were having an active, messy, push-and-pull conversation.
And here's where that conversation led us. The whiteboard evolved. Now we actually had component instances which connected to pins, which connected to nets. We also had this new concept kind of hanging off the side called topology. We were literally ironing out ambiguities in real time together, building a structural map of their expert knowledge.
Section 3. Focusing on behavior.
Okay, so we had some basic nouns in place, but a model isn't just a static data schema, right? It actually has to do work. So we decided to focus our knowledge crunching on one very specific behavioral feature to test our assumptions, the probe simulation. To see if our model actually held up, we needed to trace how an electrical signal propagated through the board to detect design problems.
I tried to map out how a signal physically gets through a component, but trying to model the internal physical behavior of a microchip, that was way too complicated for what we needed. Once again, the experts stepped in with a brilliant simplification. They told us we didn't need the internal physics, we really just needed a list of pushes, basically which pins push signals to which other pins.
Armed with that awesome simplification, I went back and updated the sketch. We started tracking the signal hops across the nets, incrementing the signal count as it passed through. We were actively simulating the software's behavior, using just markers on a board, manually stepping through the problem together. But of course, things got messy again. I had to ask, where does this push data actually come from? Is it stored on every single component instance, or is it determined by the broader component type? I started drawing out this wild, complex mapping structure, and look, I have to admit, I got way too detailed here. I was totally deep in the weeds, overcomplicating things just like we developers love to do.
While I was stuck in those weeds, I took a step back and asked, wait, where does that topology concept from earlier fit into this probe simulation? And one of the experts just casually said, oh, that's not used for this. So you know what I did? I just dropped it, crossed it right off the whiteboard.
That is absolutely vital to remember. Distilling a model isn't just about adding new things, it's equally about having the guts to drop the irrelevant concepts that are just muddying the waters.
Section 4. The prototype feedback loop.
So after all this highly interactive, chaotic brainstorming, we had to move to implementation. The big question was, how do we make this concrete? How do we take all that whiteboard knowledge crunching and turn it into working software that the domain experts can actually evaluate in their real daily workflow?
Well, we started writing code. This was the early class diagram for the prototype we built, and you can see it clearly: the component type, the instance, the pin, and the net. Every single term we had argued over and refined at that whiteboard had become a literal construct in our code. The model and the implementation were now firmly, tightly bound together.
Having that crude, functioning code had a massive impact. It finally allowed the experts to see the model in action. It wasn't just theoretical anymore. Seeing it actually work on a screen made all of our subsequent iterations incredibly interactive and focused, which massively accelerated our feedback loop.
Section 5. Ingredients of effective modeling.
If we zoom out from that specific PCB war story for a second, Eric Evans outlines 5 core ingredients for effective modeling. Number 1, bind the model and implementation, just like we did with our prototype. 2, cultivate a model-based language, so no more generic boxes, we use their terms, like pins and nets. 3, develop a knowledge-rich model that really focuses on rules and behaviors. 4, distill the model, drop things like topology when they just aren't needed. And 5, constantly brainstorm and experiment.
The biggest takeaway here is that knowledge crunching is absolutely not a solitary activity where a developer just hides in a basement. It's an active, team-based exploration. It takes this massive torrent of domain facts and winnows it down into a relevant trickle. It tests ideas instantly through spoken conversation, forging a genuine collaboration that accelerates learning for absolutely everyone involved on the project.
So I want to leave you with a question to ponder about your own projects. Is your domain model just a static document sitting in some folder gathering dust? Or is it a living language forged through the messy, loud, whiteboard reality of knowledge crunching? Let that sink in and let it change how you approach your very next meeting with a domain expert. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep crunching that knowledge.